All right. Hello, everyone. I am here with Mike, also in this Zoom call, and we're going to chat through Mike's board today because you were saying our first interaction about this pedal board was last year in February.
February 1,
So it's
370 days of
exactly right now. It's early February 2025, and the board is now basically complete. Well, like 99% finished. Is that fair?
yeah, I think it's as done as it can be.
Yeah.
There's always, I mean, we may get into this more, but one of my goals was to kind of avoid the constant changing of pedals. But, let's not fool ourselves here at the
Thank
same
you for
time.
admitting that. Yep. Yep. It's a real thing.
It is.
Yep. That's cool. So the whole reason for the video today is there's been a lot of planning in this rig. And I thought it would be great to talk through how it came together, the decisions along the way that were made, what you're loving. I know there's been a few kind of experiments that you've really, enjoyed doing and have influenced where the build went. And to be clear from the outset as well, Goodwood did not build this. You built the board. You learned a lot along the way, and it turned out beautifully.
Thank you.
And so it's not a, get a setup with Goodwood type of video. It's a let's talk about the process type of video because it's a big board, but you've thought about every pedal on this board and why you want it, why maybe other pedals were cut, what ones didn't make the cut, what ones did, and why. So why don't we talk kind of from the beginning first of why build this board in the first place? You had a good board that was your previous pedal board to this. So what was the impetus for building this rig and the size of it and like what were you trying to achieve or what problem were you trying to address?
Yeah, so I think maybe just a little bit of context. So I played a lot growing up and in my early 20s. And then I took about 12 years off from playing. When I got back into it, I thought, it'd be really great to have a single unit that just does everything and avoid the endless pedal hunt, just always wanting more pedals, different pedals. So I got a fractal, which to be honest, I think it sounded great, but over the course of using it for 2 years, it kind of sucked the joy out of playing for me. I know that's kind of strong to say. I'm not a hater on them. Again, it sounded really good, but it was the level of complexity, and I think maybe more so the number of parameters. I think people often talk about having too many options and the option paralysis, but for me, I think there is that aspect of having too many options and it's hard to make a decision. But I think the other aspect that I experienced with it was having so many options that I always had this nagging feeling that, oh, this patch could be a little bit better if I only knew how to tweak that 80-second parameter.
Yep.
And so I got to the point, where I got rid of that and decided to build another board that was centered around the Boss ES8. And that was a big board. It was the same physical board that it was built on. I think I had 5 or 6 overdrives on there, a couple boosts. The HX effects was kind of my catch-all for delay and reverb and modulation. And I had 3 iterations of that board over a few years. And even with all those options, I still found that I couldn't easily get the right texture in certain situations. Or, I found that I've never really been a big reverb user. And I realized we'll maybe come back to this, but having delay and reverb in series, I always felt like the reverb just gets out of control if I have the delay where I want it. And I'm sure that's just user error. Like I need to be better at programming it. But, I think there were a few things about the board that it took too much time, I think also is maybe the other big one. The HX effects, one thing that I didn't realize until I got really into using it is you have your preset that has 4 snapshots within it. Well, if you're changing with MIDI between the 4 presets, there's no latency. But if you're changing from a snapshot on preset 1 to a snapshot on preset 8, there is a latency. There's a gap there. And so then every song had to be its own preset. And basically, I would reprogram the same things over and over and over again because I couldn't access previous ones without having that gap. So that was kind of where I was at coming into this. I also was looking for a direct in solution that sounded like a tube amp. And I actually was hauling my tube amp to church, which had a direct out, and that worked fine. But when I mic'd it up and did comparisons with a direct in, I was no longer happy with it because it didn't.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yes, I know. It did not sound that good. So I was looking for a way to dial things in a lot quicker, have a direct in solution, and just looking to get all of the different tones that I really wanted to hear. And then I got to the point where the last board being as big as it was like, okay, if I'm going to redo this again, I really don't want to redo it again. Yeah. So let's kind of do the mother of all boards with one. So so that's how I got to this one.
So can I share my screen and show the diagram that you did of this board? And again, this will show a lot of the preparation you put into it, which some people would say, man, that's overkill. Why would you do that? But I guarantee it saved time in the building process, having thought this all through. So on screen, we have the diagram that you did. Can you, let's not stop on any pedals too quickly right now. Can you walk us through the signal chain really quickly? And then we'll come back to a couple of areas after that.
Yeah, and there's a little asterisk with the noise gate because it's not exactly as shown here, but it's just a little confusing. So we'll run through it as it's shown here. But essentially, it's guitar into the Goodwood wet dry wet box.
Yep.
And then the whole dry section is in the loop of the noise gate.
Yep.
So you see the dry send, and then so it goes up, and then I have a Goodwood Audition on the board. And actually, Chippo made me a custom one, so it would fit in a certain spot with the jacks in kind of a different position, which was pretty handy. And that's my insert point for a wah, because I do not want, wah's kind of out of fashion right now, but I do like a wah. But I didn't want it to take up all that space on the board if I'm hardly ever going to use it. So the Audition was, perfect solution for that. And then into the Chase Bliss Clean, which I'm using just as a compressor or a boost.
And this one would have been an add-on later in the planning because it wasn't released when you started planning this board.
Yes, and I think I had 4 or 5 other compressors on hand, all of which I loved, and I could not decide. And I played the Clean for a couple minutes, and I was like, "Oh, that's the one."
Yeah,
and the sound that sold me is, if you look in the manual, it's like, this is your safe place, and it shows you knob positions. So if you get lost and confused, just go back here. And I tried that. It's like, perfect. That's what I've been looking for this whole time.
Great. And then into the POG 2.
POG 2, yeah, exactly. And that one is MIDI modded, so it can be controlled by MIDI. And then into the Morningstar ML10X. So that is just being used for gain pedals. So I have 8 in there. I can see Brian O'Million rolling his eyes now.
Well, I was gonna flag this early, as in you're gonna have to at some point in the video, maybe a bit later, justify the overdrives, because there's, as with any topic, there are people that think you can get away with 1 and 2, and I wouldn't disagree with them. And then there's people that would say you need the different colors and you need 5 or 6, and I wouldn't disagree with them either. I personally can't get away with 7, 8 overdrive. It overwhelms me. But I also am not playing guitar all that often anymore. So I just want to turn 1 or 2 on. I'm good. But you've got a lot more than that. So did you test all of these drives and these were the winners, or are they all ones that you've loved in the past and they just had to go on? What was the thought between this many overdrives?
Yeah. So going back to my previous rig that had 5 or 6 on it, even with the 5 or 6, I would often find that I could not quite find the texture I wanted for a certain part. And so that's silly, I know. I'm sure people are, find that crazy. But and yeah, even with 5 or 6. So then I started thinking, okay, what are kind of the main classifications of different drive pedals? So here I ended up with the late edition was actually bringing back my Analog Man TS9. I didn't think I was going to have room, but of course, as you know, Grant, room must be filled.
Yep.
So, but yeah, so I love a tube screamer. That's another one that, kind of in and out of vogue, but I love it. But there are definitely times when I don't love the compression in it, and I'd like to get away from that. And the Antique V3 is fantastic, the Cornerstone.
Hmm.
I have that with the compression off. So basically, I have two tube screamers. One is compression, one's no compression. Um, the Octaland, in my last board, I probably worked through 15 fuzzes on the board. And no matter what I did, even putting a Beano boost after the fuzz, as soon as I kick it on, it's like it just disappear from the mix. And I was just, watching pedal videos as we do. And I heard the Octaland come on. It's like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. It sounds like an ant burning to the ground that's screaming at me.
A common sound that every pedal board needs on their board, or
Yeah.
every guitar player needs on their pedal board. Sorry.
I do need it. And actually, the great thing with the ML10X is you can run drives in parallel.
Yep.
So sometimes that's too strong of a sound. But if I run it in parallel with, say, the kilt, now that octave and the fuzz is kind of subtle. It can kind of tame it down a little bit because it's blended. But yeah, so it was the two tube screamer ones. The Octaland was kind of my fuzz. The kilt is just my distortion bucket, which with the red remote obviously can be a standard fuzz. The Lightspeed was my transparent overdrive. The top boost in a can was the Vox style. The Bondi Sikaz was the Klon style. And then the Gladio is my D style.
Great.
So those were kind of my buckets. I know I'm missing Marshall in a box and probably Tweed in a box, but got to draw the line somewhere.
And then you leave the ML10X and you go to the Strymon, the Mobius, more specifically.
You know what? If I can mention one other thing on the drive section that may be helpful just there on the diagram, the Cornerstone pedals both flip phase. So
good to know.
Yeah, so I did contact the manufacturer of all of these pedals to make sure which ones flip phase and which don't, and those two both do. So Saturn Works makes a little, just super small, like the size of an EP booster, phase inverter. So under the board, in the loop for those pedals is a phase inverter, so that I can run them in parallel with other drives and not have phase issues.
Nice, that's great, very smart.
Yeah, so then over to the Mobius. So that was just kind of my multi-modulation. That's a little bit of a self-limiter there. If I was touring and somebody else was carrying this thing around, I could have 20 analog modulation pedals.
I was just plugging into my DC2W today, just the Boss Dimension C. And after doing a little video on modulation stuff, and it's just, there's just nothing like an analog modulation, an analog chorus or whatever it may be. It just sounds better. There's some meme online. It's like, it's just warmer. It's just the warmth, all over. And yeah, so I'm not going to disagree with you there, but it can get out of hand very quickly.
It can. And really, I mean, if I threw, like, I did have an Analog Man, his chorus on hand at one point, and it's like, well, I would love to put that on the board, but I still have a gap for other modulation pedals, and I don't have room for 10 of them. So, I don't even have room for 3 of them. So I have to do something to cover that ground. So, and the Mobius is easy to use, and it has the pre-post, so you'll see it on the signal chain twice.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Great. And then into EQ, which is great. After the kind of gain section, roughly, which is, I personally love it there. Some people will run it early in their chain, but I think after the overdrives makes a lot of sense. Back into your noise gate. So now the loop of the noise gate is complete. And then we leave the noise gate and go to the dry in on the wet, dry, wet box.
Exactly. Yeah.
So from there, you have a dry out, and I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one comment on the Free the Tone. So, I am using the Chase Bass Clean as a compressor, of course, and I am using the Free the Tone EQ as an EQ, but probably, maybe most commonly, I'm using the two of them as boosts. So let's say I want, I'm using the light speed, but I just want to hit it a little bit. I can use the clean to give me a little boost into the light speed and give me a little more gain.
Yep.
Or if I love the sound, but I just want a little more of it, I can use the free the tone to give me a little more volume coming out. So those are kind of dual purpose in that way.
Which is something a lot of people ask about, like what booster do you recommend? And they already have a GE7 or a Source Audio EQ2 or something. You've got a clean boost built into your board already,
Yeah.
depending on how you want to use it. And so, yeah, that's great. Okay, and then we're into the dry section is now complete on the pedal board. Are you
What?
running
Oh, sorry.
straight out of the dry out of the wet dry wet box to an amp, or are you doing anything else kind of funky at that point with the dry amp?
Yeah, so there is kind of a funky thing there. So I had Chippo customize something for me on the wet dry wet box, where there is functionally an audition built into it,
Yep.
but where it fits in the signal chain, I wanted to have a volume pedal for the dry and for the wet. But if I put the volume pedal right before the dry return, then that's going to affect the wet volume as
It'll be
well.
global. Yep.
So there is an audition in the wet dry wet box, and that in terms of signal chain is immediately before the output.
The dry
So
output.
the dry output. So it only affects the dry, but yeah, so that's really handy there. And then then I'm either going to a dry amp or I have my amp board, which I don't know if you want to
I
hit
can
that.
I can bring that up here. Let me share the other screen here. The amp board, there's a whole nother conversation that needs to happen here.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
it's
can of worms, but man, I tell you, I want to shout it from the top of the mountains that I've
Kez.
cracked.
This is the amp board right here.
Yeah, and all the
So tell us about it.
yeah. So summer of 23, so about a year and a half ago, I bought a bunch of Kingsley pedals. I had I had a couple of the UA pedals, and I later got the Lion as well. I think I had one of the Victory pedals that has, I think, a tube preamp and then maybe a cab sim in it.
Yep.
And I was trying to find a direct in solution that I liked, and I didn't like any of them. I thought the Kingsley stuff, when I ran it in front of my amp, I absolutely loved it. It's unbelievably good. But I always felt like it felt kind of stiff to me straight into a cab sim and then into front of house. It didn't like it sounded good, but it didn't feel like an amp to me. There wasn't that little bit of like squish that you get with an amp. And so I ended up having a long conversation with Simon, and we talked about some different options. And one day it dawned on me, well, no wonder it doesn't feel like an amp. I'm missing a whole stage of an amp being the powering. And so, he has the Crucible, which I'm sure is amazing.
Mm.
Uh, but also, budget is a concern. It may not look like a concern with how ridiculously huge the board is, but I did work on the side for a whole year to pay for this stuff. And I bought almost all of it used. So it's not like it may look like I just had cash to blow, but like money was definitely a big concern to make it work. And so I was just, asking him about different options. I ended up buying 2 Pages, 2 Peasants, and there might have been another one in there, but then the Page was close as a power amp replacement, but it broke up pretty easily because of how hot the output of the preamps are.
Mm.
And so I messaged Simon just to see if there was anything we could do. And sure enough, he said, "Oh yeah, I can make a low gain Page for you." So the Constable is actually, so that's my dry, the top row is a dry. The Constable is a special order. The notes are on my signal chain, but it's a special, I don't know, it's like raised B plus voltage and a 12 AY7 so that it has more headroom. Because the original Constable does break up kind of easily,
Yep.
as you would expect from a Marshall. And then the Squire is his top boost version, so that the bottom row is the wet. And then both Pages are custom order low gain, so they have almost no gain unless you get past like 2 o'clock maybe. So it's amazing because it feels just like an amp. You have that little bit of compression. There's actually a fair amount of compression in the sense of how it feels like it smooths things out. But I'm astonished at how much headroom it still has. Like if I use that EQ and give it a really hot signal, it never, even if I crank it all the way up, it never gets to that point where it's limiting. Like it can take whatever I want to give it, but it feels like there's an always on compressor on.
Hmm.
And it sounds and feels just like an amp. I know it's expensive, but like I have no sadness plugging into this instead of my tube amps. And then the reason there are two aux stomps on there is you can run them in stereo, but if you do, then you have you can put two mics in the aux stomp on the virtual cab. But if you run it in stereo, it's only one mic per side. And
Gotcha.
I wanted that blend of the ribbon and the 57. So yeah, so top row is dry, bottom row is wet, and then they go to the long line. And then so I can go out in wet dry with two outputs, or I can hit that little sum button and go out with just one output, depending on what I have at front of house. And then also going up there to the slow gear headphone amp.
From the 1/4 inch outs of long line.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Which is a really cool. It's a really cool device. I know the kind of the feature set of it. I've never actually used one in person, but the slow gear, the headphone amp is cool because you got the stereo in outs, you got a headphone jack, obviously, and an aux in as well, right? So you could practice along. Is that kind of what you would do with that one? Like you could put an MP3 into it or something?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't used it that way yet, but it was really one of the, I know Canvas Walrus has something similar now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't out when when I built this. And the other thing, and I don't, maybe the Walrus does this, but the output of those preamps, I mean, it's line level. I mean, you could go straight into an effects loop of an amp and hit the power amp with it. So it does have that pad to be able to change from instrument level to line level, which is handy.
That's very cool. Okay, so let's go back to the pedal board here and talk through the wet section.
Yeah.
Let me just bring up the right file here. Sorry, my screens have been turned around.
Oh, good. Yeah, and the other thing too that's fun with the amp board is Simon is just, I mean, he's amazing.
The best.
He is. And he's just like, he's such a sweet guy. He's just so patient. He's so patient, and his work is just second to none. So, it's all the more reason to go that route.
I remember I told you this earlier on, but in the middle of planning this, and he's 20 minutes down the road, so I was going to visit him. And I told him, I was like, I'm working with a guy here who's bought like 6 of your pedals or something like that. And so he was obviously appreciative, but it's just cool to see. I'll say this, I haven't met anyone that has tried his stuff and been disappointed.
Yeah.
It's just great stuff. And it's all like, a lot of products have tubes in them as a marketing kind of gimmick, but they aren't actually running plate voltages. Like they aren't running 300 volts. So you aren't actually getting the benefit of having a tube. You're just getting to say that you're using a tube when really it's not doing anything. But all of his stuff is run properly. And I think that's a lot of the magic it's just incredible stuff. So I'm glad that I'm pumped that you have that stuff in there. So, okay, back to the screen. We've hit the dry section. You have the dry volume here, the Layla Mono Volume S. That's going out to your dry section, dry pedal board, potentially, depending on what you're using. And then we go to the wet section. And I think if I'm following the diagram right here, we go wet send out to the Scarlet Tunic, which I've never used. I've never heard of it. I've heard of Thorpe, but I've never heard of the Scarlet Tunic. What's that thing?
Yeah, it's a little under the radar. So this was made, I think it might have been a request from maybe Roger Waters, guitar player. I could be saying that wrong, and I'm sure someone will gladly correct me if I am. But it is supposed to recreate some certain amp that was classic on the original Pink Floyd recordings, the Selmer something. Um, but if you crank the presence all the way up, it does a Voxy kind of thing. And
Bit of
so,
chime.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I love the Kingsley Squire top boost, but the Thorpe there, I just leave it on all the time. And it gives that, I don't know. To be honest, I've never played a matchless. I've only heard them. I know you have a matchless and love that matchless. But
Yep.
when I think of one, I think of a high headroom, hi-fi AC30. And so the Scarlet Tunic kind of is there for that tone shaping to give that hi-fi quality hitting then, later the Squire top boost.
Yep. And then you have then your wet volume pedal, and then you're going into the RJM PBC 6X.
Exactly, and that's the brain of the whole operation. Everything, the ML10X, all those overdrives are all controlled via MIDI, as is the POG and the Chase Bliss Clean and the Strymon and the Free the Tone. All of that is MIDI controlled. So that little PBC is certainly powerful. But yeah, you guys on the Chairman did a episode with Ron from RJM, and you guys talked about the micro line mixer.
Yep.
I think I commented on that video that this was an expensive watch because I had up until that point, that was about midway through the build, and I had not really considered parallel for
Yep.
the wet yet because it was one of those things that I had tried to look into once, and I thought, oh, that's just confusing. It's really actually not that confusing. But, and I think the ability of the PVC to send out of the 6 loops and not have to come back to the unit, and it's basically just a splitter, that makes it really simple in terms of doing parallels. So the 6 loops there, only 2 of them actually return to the PVC and go out the output. So that's the Mobius, which is post. That's the second input and output on the Mobius, and then the one analog modulation. I just could not get. Grant, there are a few times when you plug in a pedal and you hit one chord and you're like, oh, this is different. And the gravitas was that.
Yep.
So I couldn't get away from that one. So those 2 loops go out and come back, and then they go out of the PVC. But then the rest of them are all run in parallel, which I think I actually have some of the old Goodwood videos to thank for that.
The parallel thing.
Yeah, some of your old videos where you're talking about signal chain and series versus parallel. And,
I don't recommend anyone watch those. They're pretty cringy.
well, they got this whole wet section created, so I don't know. I'm glad I watched. I actually, in the process, maybe we'll hit some of the preparation a little bit later, but in the process of building, I watched every video on the Goodwood channel.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
nice.
Every single, all the way back to the beginning. Somebody in a coffee shop or something.
Yeah, that was Mikey. Mikey and I started Goodwood together back in 2010. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
I watched all of this, but
crazy.
I should have sent you a picture of my desk when I was running experiments for parallel versus series. I mean, I showed the picture to a couple people, and I think I almost gave them a heart attack. I mean, it's just like absolute mess of cables everywhere. But it was another one of those moments, having especially verb and delay in parallel, one chord, and it's like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. This is exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Because, one of the goals of the board was clarity, and being able to run things in parallel. The delays are not triggering more reverb because they're both seeing the initial signal. That was just a total game changer. So yeah, the source audio stuff. I don't know if this is a good time to hit. I did have a couple Strymon pedals in there. That was the Big Sky and the Timeline. And, I'm going to tell it like it is, Grant. I was pretty disappointed.
Okay. But have you ever had them before, or was this kind of a first?
This was a first.
Okay.
And I think they sounded good. Obviously, I mean, they're like the staple, right? Like I'm not a hater on the pedals. What was disappointing was the lack of stereo image.
Yeah.
Uh, a couple of the delay, like the pattern, and maybe there was one other one
Dual.
have, yeah, they go back and forth. But for the most part, it was just the modulation that's in stereo. And if I'm going through all this hassle and I'm setting up 3 amps when I'm actually going through amps, like I want all the width. I
Yeah.
want all of it. So yeah, so I recently switched. I mean, these are just like 2 weeks old to the Source Audio stuff. Um, and then all the way there on the right, the Walrus, Lore and Fable. Another thing, I pretty much play in church, and swells are a big part of playing in church. And I don't like playing swells, Grant. I don't know why, but they're just not fun. So I thought, I like things that are a little quirky. And so the Lore and Fable are both ambient, but a little quirky. And so they're both mono pedals though. So I'm running them in faux stereo. So that loop is stereo, so it splits, goes Lore is on the left, Fable's on the right, and then they merge back.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's that one. And then you see in the 2 loops there on the left, the Electro Harmonix Mel 9, so the Mellotron pedal. Again, I like quirky things. I've always loved Mellotron. And then the EHX C9, so kind of as a B3 kind of thing.
Yep. And that's just on the one of the outputs of the PVC, not both, it looks like, according to your diagram. Like, is it because it's a mono pedal, right?
Yeah, so
Oh,
okay,
loop two, it says.
yes, there we go. I think I ran out of room in my Excel doc where I made them.
Gotcha.
I didn't want to move stuff, so it's loop 2. So you see 7 pedals down there because the Mobius is in the insert loop.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. That's great. Okay. So then that's also in parallel.
Yeah,
And the cool thing about the 6X is that, like you were saying earlier, you can just use the send if you want to, and it'll send out in parallel in relation to the other signals on the board. And let's say in parallel with the output of the 6X is a way to say that. And so you're running the C9, the Mel 9, Ventress Reverb, Nemesis Delay, and Lore and Fable, the faux stereo thing, all in parallel. So now you have to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 amps to get all of those parallel signals, or you need to mix them down into a master left out.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and functionally, the Mobius or the Gravitas are in parallel as well because they're coming out of the PPC, so they're
Yep.
not affecting. In terms of loop order, I have them at the end,
Oh,
so that
okay,
if I have
cool.
tremolo on, it's not creating the tremolo on the delay
Yep.
later. But yeah, so again, Chippo worked his magic and made me a custom
Here,
6-channel
I'll
line
show the
mixer.
picture here. I'll see if I can zoom in at all.
Oh yeah, I know the lighting's not the best, but
So it's a
yeah,
little blurry, but yeah, the second one in from the left.
yeah, that's the one. And have the knobs coordinating with what they're mixing. So it's easy. So I don't have to label them. I know
Yeah.
offhand, that green one is the Lore, the white
Yeah.
one's
Okay.
etc. So yeah, so there's a left in and a right in and oh yeah, sorry, 6 inputs. And then there's a left and right out. Sorry.
Crazy.
Oh
Very
yeah,
cool.
it's so much fun.
So that's all parallel. You have the level knobs there so you can control the different effects levels because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but off the top of my head, the C9, Mal 9, Lore, and Fable, possibly, but I could be wrong in those, they don't have kill dry. So you have to max out the knobs, which means you can't control the effect level because the effect level is now maxed to get rid of the dry signal in there. So now
Yep.
at the line mixer, you can pull you can pull that level down per line and it creates kill dry, but with an external line mixer, if that's not a horrible explanation.
No, that's spot on. Yeah, the 2 electro harmonics pedals have a dry volume and a wet volume.
Perfect. Okay. I didn't know
I
that.
just have the wet cranked and the dry off, And then the lore and fable, I just have the mix on 100%.
Perfect. And then, so now you're in parallel. I'm going to ask you what you think about parallel in a second. But after that, we leave the 6-channel line mixer. And now, to clarify, all of the left inputs of the line mixer go to one master left out. All of the
Correct.
right inputs go to one master right out, all mixed down in parallel. So if you run a ping-ponging delay left and right in, and you run a let's see, what else do we have? A heavy modulation from the ventris that's moving back and forth. They will both ping pong and move back and forth together because they're mixed down in parallel together.
Exactly.
So that's how the mixer works. And then we go in stereo to the returns on the wet dry wet box, and we leave the wet dry wet box, and you can go to your amps from there. So
Exactly.
that is the signal chain. It only took us 40 minutes to get here. Now let's talk about what I remember. I remember receiving your email, and it made me so happy because this is like, for me, this is what it's all about. Where you essentially emailed after trying wet dry wet, and you couldn't believe it. Like, you absolutely loved it. And I love it personally when people connect with their rig and are able to create music they couldn't create before, or are inspired to play in ways they weren't before. And so why don't you tell us about wet dry wet? And I'll give the one caveat of, I do not think wet dry wet is for everyone. I'm not trying to sell wet dry wet to everyone. I'm talking about, you found a sound in your rig that you really connected with. And why don't you kind of tell us about kind of that, why that was, and what it is about these parallel effects that you love so much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the quick backstory there. So the seed was that previous board that was built around the ES8 and the HX effects. When I was building it, I remember talking with a friend of mine named Aaron, and he was, he was excited for me and my board. He said, but if you really want to go all out, you got to do wet, dry, wet. And I remember looking into it briefly then and thought, oh, that looks really confusing. Because again, this is when I'm first getting back into playing after 12 years of not playing, coming off the fractal. I haven't built a board in, 15 years. Wet, dry, wet was a big leap for me. And so I just kind of flushed it, but it was always in the back of my mind. Aaron saying wet, dry, wet's the way to go. And then fast forward a few years later, I was seeing one of my favorite bands, Flying Colors, play live. And their lead player is Steve Morse. And I remember thinking that I had never heard anything like that. It felt like he was everywhere. Like, I don't know how to, I felt like I was in a tornado of Steve Morse. And he famously runs wet dry. And, he's got the big Ernie Vol volume pedals, and he's got a separate one for his verb and for his delay and all of this. And so I realized what Steve Morse was doing around the same time that I saw a TPS, that pedal show, wet dry video, and also Chairman had been up for some time. And so I was going back and watching some of the Goodwood videos and saw some things about wet dry wet, saw the Junction Box video and thought, oh, wow, this doesn't have to be rocket science. Like, I'm gonna let Grant do all the work and make it simple. So that's kind of the backstory of how I got to it. But then, running things in parallel. Well, maybe to finish up wet, dry, wet, or wet, dry. When I'm going direct, I only have the 2 rows, so I'm going wet, dry when I go direct. When I bust the amps out, I got 3 of them. But wet, dry, wet is, man, every time I've talked to anybody who has run it, they're like overwhelmed with the sound. There's a that pedal show episode where they I think it's the one that's did we get wet, dry, wet wrong? And those guys have played everything, right? And played through all these amazing sounding things, and they finish playing the wet, dry, wet properly set up rig, and they're just like overwhelmed. And I just noticed this pattern of, every time somebody plays wet, dry, wet, that's how they feel. It's like, that's how I want to feel. And so what I love about playing through that rig is, I always struggled a bit. I mentioned earlier, not really using reverb that much because I felt like it just mucked up my tone. Like, it just made it muddy. And again, that's user error. I'm sure lots of people use reverb and sound fantastic. So not a reverb hater, but I felt like at some point when you're running series, the more delay and the more verb you have, you start losing clarity on the signal. And with wet, dry, wet, you can make it as absurdly soupy as you want. And because you have that dry amp that has just, overdrive and nothing else, basically, you're always totally clear, no matter how crazy you want to get with all of the verbs and delays and all these things. So it just opened up a totally different world of, like, I find myself getting lost in playing. And I mean to sit down and just try something for 2 minutes, and all of a sudden I look up and it's been 45 minutes and I can't stop playing because it's such an immersive experience, maybe is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think, with parallel, which is, kind of tied with that, it's all about the clarity, being able to, and, another thing too, Grant, that I think is underrated with parallel is the simplicity in the sense, maybe it's a little more complex to wire up, but not, in my last rig running in series, if I thought, oh, you know what, I want a couple more repeats on my delay. Well, now I have more verb. So now I need to change the verb. And it's like one thing impacts the other because they're all in series going down the line.
Cascading, right?
In parallel, it's like, oh, if I want a little more delay, I just turn up the delay and I'm done. It doesn't change my reverb at all. So to me, it makes it easier to program, even though the wiring is more complex. But man, just to have that clarity on each line is just so fun. And I mean, that's really, I don't think I knew it, but that was one of the things I was looking for.
Very cool. And I will say as well, if you've ever watched a video, as I have and you have, and countless number of other people have, and listen to people going on about wet, dry, wet, and they're in the room listening to wet, dry, wet, being blown away, and you're sitting there, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, sounds good, but it's not that good. It's something you have to experience in the room.
Yeah.
And that may be the biggest case against wet, dry, wet is listening to it in a recording in a mix of 5 other instruments and 3 vocals and whatnot. You probably won't appreciate wet, dry, wet as much. But when you're practicing, if you love to just sit at home and practice and play guitar and that's your main thing, you just love to play at home or mess around with recording at home, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Wet, dry, wet. Even I remember doing it with what were they? It was like those 3, oh, it was 3 little AC4s, like the
Oh, no way.
crappiest tube amps you could ever get. The little Vox AC4s. And they're not that bad, but they're not good. And I think they're little 8-inch speakers,
Yeah.
1 tube in them. And I did wet, dry, wet just to see, like, what would it sound like with terrible amps? It was huge. It
Oh,
sounded so good. And because it's just this, like, it's a really good way you described it earlier. When you're in the room, it feels like you are drenched in guitar tone. Like it's behind you, it's off to your left, it's off in the right corner, it's above you, and you're just saturated with this thing, just kind of moving and swelling around you. And so it's absolutely something to try at one point in your life if you can't have a wet, dry, wet rig. But I can also 100% understand people that play and tour for a living. They've always run mono. It's always been great for them. It's like, why would I do that to myself? And you shouldn't. But just try it once and just enjoy. Enjoy while you can and don't commit to it on your rig. But for people like yourself and maybe myself, where I mainly 90% of the time, I'm either doing a video for Goodwood and playing guitar, or I'm just sitting down. I got 10 minutes and I just want to shut the world out and I want to play guitar for a second. If I can just turn on wet, dry, wet, it is the best few minutes of playing guitar. It's just incredible. And so, yeah, I mean, just like everything else, it'll work for some and not for others. But every guitar player, I hope they get to experience it, be in the room with it at least once because it's incredible. It's a lot of fun, and the effects need to be in parallel. The effects need to be in kill dry. You need to have a dedicated dry amp with some great overdrives running to it, and the delays and modulation, reverb has to be moving back and forth between the two amps,
Yeah.
which was your issue with Strymon.
Yeah.
On a lot of the algorithms, they'd send out what I would call, and people might hate this description, more of a dual mono thing. The same repeats are sent at the same time out the left and right outputs. And it'll still sound great as wet, dry, wet, but it won't sound nearly as good when it's ping ponging and moving back and forth to the left and the right amp with the dry, transient amp with just your dry signal right in the middle. It's something pretty powerful. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really cool. I love the fact that you put in all this effort into this rig and you're loving it at the end. It would kill me for you to have done all of this. Like, no, I'm just going back to HXFX and that'll be good enough for me. Like, it's great to hear that you love it and you put in a ton of prep time. And I guarantee now, if you were to do another rig in, let's say, 4 years, like I want to make some changes, your understanding of the whole process has infinitely grown because of this last 8 to 12 months of planning, testing. That's always something I talk about. Like, spend a lot of time on testing out your rig before you start building. And now you know a lot more. I won't say you know everything that you love and the way you love it, but you know much, much more about what you're after and how to get there quickly. And so it's really cool. I bet if you did this whole thing over again, it would be a 2 month process instead of a 12-month process. And then you do it a third time after that, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, you know what I mean? Like, it'll just get quicker and quicker every time you do it. So when is the proper maiden voyage of this thing? Now that it's wired up, you know, you can run it in mono, stereo, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, 4 cable. Can you run 4 and 5 cable with this one? Your wet, dry, wet box has the effect send on it, I think, right? The jack above
So
the dry out.
those jacks we replaced with the Audition for the dry
That's
volume.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the reason for that was that I wanted my volume pedals all the way over on the right.
Yeah.
That's just where I'm used to having them. So I could have gone out of the wet, dry, wet box with the dry signal to the volume pedal and then to the amp, but it would have been a pain to have to go from the bottom left corner where the wet, dry, wet box is and where I wanted it all the way to the right to the volume pedal and then have to plug in from there to go back to my amp that's over there. So anyway, so all that to say, we got rid of that effect send and used it for the Audition instead.
Yeah. Cool. So when are you playing it first?
Yeah, maiden public voyage. I actually used the amp board a couple weeks ago, and it
Oh,
was.
nice.
But maiden voyage of the big board is 2 weeks.
Crazy. Very cool. And now, like, a whole separate video is how do you actually go about programming this thing, and getting all the sounds you like. But again, once you get a couple presets under your belt, it goes pretty quick. So yeah, I don't know if you have any final thoughts or any kind of, I don't know, things, takeaways from building this rig, but I think we're just about done here.
Yeah. I think maybe one thing to add here at the end is I think in terms of preparation, I think there's a lot of joy in the journey, right? I think we tend to, regardless of what it is, we got the Super Bowl coming up, right? Like, if my team wins the Super Bowl, like, that'll be great. But like the next day or maybe a couple days after, like, oh yeah, okay, now it's done. It's sometimes the journey is more satisfying than the destination, or maybe as satisfying. I think sometimes the journey is a little underrated. And I think really dragging it out in a sense and having so much prep time was a lot of fun, honestly. Like, I totally get the temptation to just rush through it and like you want to put it together and you want to get to the end. Like, I totally get that. But man, it was a lot of fun taking all that time to work through it. And for me, at least, I find all that prep time to be fun. But when you run into problems, or if I had wired it up and it didn't work, or I had like grossly missed some things, that is such a drag. Like, it's not worth risking it, because it could make me just regret doing the whole thing altogether.
Yeah.
Whereas more prep, yeah, it took longer, but honestly, it might have been more fun. And then having no major problems at the end. I mean, it's a
That's a
win-win.
testament right there. I mean, I've built rigs much smaller than this, especially earlier on, and it was like rip my hair out frustrating. I just wanted to scream, and it was because I was under the pump. I had to move quick. I missed something that I shouldn't have missed. And then you find the problem like, well, maybe I just need to plug in the cable next time and it'll work. But that doesn't happen, not nearly as much at least, when you aren't rushed. And if it does, you aren't stressed about it because you got time. You can fix it.
Well, and even that thing we talked about with the dry volume and using Audition, so I didn't have to go away from one corner to the other corner to back the other way. I caught that 7 months in.
Yeah.
It was like 2 days before Chippo built the unit. I was like, oh crap, I hadn't thought of it, and that would have been, it'd have been really rough to have spent, 9 months planning the rig and that unit and it gets built. And then, oh shoot, I didn't think of this, so it's, yeah, it's worth taking the time, even though it's hard to slow down.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I'm excited to hear how the maiden voyage goes in a couple of weeks. And I assume, are you going to be running wet dry for that stereo? What are you going to be running?
Yeah, so I'll be running wet dry, but with just single output.
Yep.
So yeah, with our current setup, most of the time I'll get one input on the board. So I'll use a long line to sum down. So the wet dry wet box is summing the wet down to one. So then I have the two outputs that go to the board, and then those get summed down by long line to a single
So kind
XLR.
of parallel wet dry.
Exactly.
Yep. Great, man. Awesome. Well, I'll try and post updates as well, and if they're there, and all the best with the rig. Thanks for walking us through this today. This is really cool, and I love that you got it all built with little to no mistakes along the way. Obviously, there's tweaks and adjustments along the way, but no huge frustrations. And again, I give the credit to well, your ability to follow a detailed map, but also taking your time to plan it out. And yeah, I'm really pumped to see how this thing goes for you. And talking in maybe 6 months to a year and seeing if you still have mostly the same pedal board, which I think at this point it sounds like you will. So it'll be cool to get an update down the road and see where things are at.
I mean, I probably had, when I started testing, I probably had, it might have been 80 pedals on hand.
Wow. Nice.
Like each one of those overdrive slots, I think I had 5 or 6 pedals that I shot out for that one spot. So yeah, I think a lot of them are safe, but
Yep.
you never.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great chatting to you. And we'll update you guys as time progresses. Mike, thanks again, man. And we'll talk to you guys soon.